In recent months, anxiety has been growing in Washington. Another strategic ally of the United States, South Korea, is gradually drifting toward Beijing. This seems impossible because South Korea has long been considered one of the most reliable American partners in East Asia, a crucial link in the U.S. security architecture, and a pillar for containing China and North Korea. But as analysts at the Washington Post and Japan's Nikkei Asia report, a rift between Seoul and Washington has appeared suddenly and is widening every month. It all began with what seemed like a local incident: Donald Trump's decision, as part of his anti-immigration campaign, to deport dozens of South Korean workers from the Hyundai factory in Georgia. This plant had been one of the symbols of industrial partnership between the two countries, an example of successful integration of Korean technology and American labor. When Trump called the workers foreigners taking jobs from Americans and personally announced the start of a massive operation against migrants, Seoul perceived it not just as an unfriendly act, but as a humiliation. At a closed briefing, South Korea's industry minister said that for the first time in 30 years of cooperation, the Korean side felt like an unwanted partner. Since then, the relationship has slowly but steadily cooled. At first, the U.S. administration tried to smooth things over, explaining Trump's actions as domestic politics. But after the elections and the rise to power of new South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, the situation changed dramatically. According to Reuters and Bloomberg sources, the new cabinet in Seoul began a cautious rapprochement with Beijing. Officially, this was for economic stability. Unofficially, it was to show Washington that Korea can determine its own foreign policy. Insiders from South Korea's foreign ministry report that in recent weeks, a series of secret consultations took place between Seoul and Beijing at the deputy minister level. They discussed mechanisms of trade insurance, a special regime under which China and Korea could compensate each other for losses from U.S. tariffs. According to sources from China's South China Morning Post, Beijing offered Seoul a new architecture of trust, a system of mutual supplies of electronics, rare earth materials, and battery components bypassing American chains. Experts from Singapore's Institute of Strategic Studies note that this is more than economics. It is a signal. South Korea is showing that it does not intend to be a pawn in the U.S. trade war. In an interview with JTBC, President Lee Jae-myung said, "We are grateful to the United States for decades of partnership, but the era of unconditional dependence is over. Korea must defend its own interests." These words caused a storm in Washington. The next day, Trump on Truth Social accused Seoul of playing both sides and threatened to reevaluate U.S. military commitments on the Korean peninsula. However, the Korean press reacted calmly. Leading publications such as the Korea Herald and Hankyoreh wrote that Trump is acting like a businessman, not a leader of alliances. One columnist even wrote that America has lost the ability to listen to its friends, becoming a country that only speaks in ultimatums. Against this diplomatic chill, a new sensation emerged. According to Bloomberg Asia, a delegation from Seoul visited Beijing under the pretext of attending an economic forum, but behind closed doors discussed the possibility of partial participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative. For Washington, this was a shock. Until recently, Seoul was considered a key counterbalance to Chinese influence. Now, according to Yonhap, South Korean officials are studying a participation format that would allow them to maintain the alliance with the United States while receiving economic benefits from China. An anonymous source in the South Korean parliament said if America imposes 100% tariffs and China offers zero, can anyone really ignore the alternative? The decisive moment came in early October when Trump announced the introduction of new tariffs against China, starting on the 1st of November. Among the countries that traditionally supported such steps, South Korea remained silent this time. Moreover, according to the Japanese television channel NHK, Seoul sent Beijing a diplomatic signal of understanding China's position. It was not official support, but for analysts at Stratfor and Rand Corporation, it was a clear marker that South Korea is preparing for a new stage, a rethinking of its alliances. Former U.S. Ambassador to Seoul Mark Lippert said in an interview with CNN that if earlier China was a threat to Seoul, now it is becoming insurance against American unpredictability. According to him, after Trump's sharp actions in the fields of migration and tariffs, many Asian allies felt that the United States could turn against them at any moment. Trump behaves as if allies are clients who can be replaced. the diplomat added. Against this background, Seoul intensified contacts with Beijing and even with Moscow. Sources from the Financial Times claim that the Korean side is considering participating in energy projects in the Far East, together with China and Russia. This is an unprecedented step. 5 years ago, such negotiations were considered impossible. Meanwhile, concern is growing in the United States. Democratic congressmen are demanding an investigation into whether Seoul is violating military intelligence sharing agreements. The White House, according to Politico, is preparing a package of diplomatic pressure measures, including a possible reduction in funding for joint defense programs. However, as analysts at the Brookings Institution note, all these steps only accelerate the distancing. Each new Trump ultimatum brings Korea closer to China, their latest report says. Meanwhile, a new public agenda is forming within South Korea. Young people tired of constant dependence on American technology are increasingly advocating technological partnership with China. According to a Gallup Korea poll, 47% of respondents believe that the country should balance its ties rather than rely exclusively on the United States. This is a reflection of a new era. Universities are discussing how sanctions and tariffs affect Korean electronics, and television shows openly say America is no longer a guarantor of stability, but a source of uncertainty. According to The Economist, the Lee Jae-myung administration is preparing a strategic plan until the year 2030 in which China is considered not a rival, but an economic partner with elements of cautious trust. In this document, which has not yet been officially published, there is a clause on reducing the vulnerability of Korean industry to American sanctions. This is a direct signal. Many analysts are already calling what is happening the second Asian drift. After the Philippines partially distanced itself from Washington and resumed cooperation with Beijing, South Korea is now next in line. And if this trend continues, the US strategy in the Indo-Pacific region will be under threat. According to Politico Asia, the Pentagon has already sent a delegation to Seoul for informal talks, officially to discuss military coordination, unofficially to persuade Korea not to get closer to China. But as professor of international relations at Korea University Park Yong-sik notes, these visits are too late. Trust has already been destroyed. Step by step, America is losing another ally, not through wars and coups, but through a policy of humiliation and tariffs. South Korea, a country that built an economic miracle largely thanks to American support, is now looking for a way to maintain independence in an era when Washington is once again building walls. And if this path leads it to Beijing, it will not be China's fault, but America's, which has stopped listening to its friends. American think tanks are already warning that if Washington does not change its rhetoric, South Korea may become the first country to officially declare a multipolar partnership with China. In China, according to Global Times, preparations are underway, and in Beijing they are discussing the possibility of granting Korea a special status in regional economic structures. Meanwhile, behind the scenes at the United Nations, rumors have emerged about a planned meeting of foreign ministers from China, Korea, and Russia, where a new format of economic cooperation may be discussed. The American side, according to CNN, plans to send a congressional delegation to Seoul to clarify the US position, but Korean media are already writing that the visit is unlikely to change the country's course. And if these trends continue, the historic alliance built on the blood of the Korean War may collapse under the weight of a new era of trade conflicts and mistrust.